Time to play the game!
Hey guys, Retro Dude here. Thanks for visiting my channel again, where we take a look at all things retro and cool. Though it might not always be retro, it is always cool. Alright, lately I've been playing this game called Elden Ring. And I dubbed it Elden Ring the Never Ending, because it took me 188 hours or something like that to beat the whole game. Now granted, I was going back and forth, I was taking my time with the bosses, I was taking my time with the enemies, but still 188 hours. I don't think I've ever played a game that long on a single playthrough. So I figured I'd take a stab and review it. Now going into it, one of the things was I knew it was good because a lot of people had already mentioned it to me, that had already told me, you know what, you gotta check this out, you gotta play this game. And so I knew it was good. I didn't actually go in and review it right off the bat as soon as it was released because of the hype following it. I've been burned before, and if you remember Cyberpunk, you know what I'm talking about. This game was super hyped. It was supposed to be great because it was made by the same people that made Witcher 3, my favorite game of all time. And I bought it just simply for that reason, and when it was released it was completely unplayable. So nowadays I just wait for a game to be released and for the few updates to actually be implemented into it. Again, I've been burned before with the Black Ops, with the Black Ops 4. They got rave reviews, it was really good. Then they started implementing updates on it and trying to do these microtransactions and just killing the game slowly with the updates. So nowadays I just prefer waiting until the game has actually been out for a while before I start playing it, just so I don't get these surprises. Now before I even get started, let's talk about why this game was so hyped. So it's made by a developer called From Software. It makes some really popular games in the vein of Bloodborne, Dark Souls, Sekiro, and Elden Ring was their take on open world gaming. So From Software is really well known for making difficult games and excellent boss fights. Now, like I was mentioning, the game is massive. I did 188 hours on it, and I'm sure I missed a ton of content on it. So in terms of content, the game is rich with it. There's some games that take you through galaxies. This game just takes place in a single continent for the most part, and I can tell you that early on in the game you realize how much is crammed into every single little aspect of this game. For example, like every new cave takes you around 2 to 4 hours to beat, and they all have different items for you to obtain by going through them, in contrast to, say, Skyrim, who again was supposed to be a never-ending game. However, it would recycle dungeons with menial tasks. So for example, you would go to a village and they would run up to you and tell you, hey, this person was kidnapped. So there you go to the dungeon to rescue the kidnapped person, and it would always go on like that, like randomly generated events, but they were menial, like basically nothing important gained from it. Not so in this game. Every one of those caves had something that you could probably use depending on your play style. Talking about the dungeons, again, in Skyrim, they would recycle dungeons all the time. And yes, they would generate randomly how they would play out. They were very similar. In this game, the level design is very well thought out. More so than a ton of other games that I've played that are open world or not. So with a game this massive, I actually would have liked to have a little tick or a check mark, like you've already been here, you've explored here, or something, to basically you keep track of where you've been, just to figure out, like, hey, have I missed this? Do I need to go check this out? Did I have to track back? because there are certain dungeons where I couldn't get through. For example, there was a lava dungeon that you could barely even walk through, and there was like a weird mechanical horse carriage thing that would just run me over, and I couldn't get past that, so I had to get out of that dungeon and go back in at a later time after I had gotten an item that would allow me to traverse the lava a little bit faster. So just looking for that dungeon again after I had like basically gone another say 20 to 40 hours was an undertaking. Just like looking through the map, it's like, man, is it this dungeon, is it this dungeon, is it this dungeon? It would have been good to have a little tick. It's like, well, you haven't beat this dungeon, maybe you should go back to it. Another aspect that was really cool with it was From Software really took the open world concept and ran with it. So you can actually start the game and go to like the hardest difficult areas and start playing from there if you want to, and you will obtain like the best gear that you can if you know where to look for it. The replayability alone on that aspect, especially for speedrunners, would be high. So nothing stops you from going virtually anywhere at any time in this world. From Software is known for making games that literally test your skill as a gamer. So the last game that I remember testing you this way was Ninja Gaiden. When I played it back in the Xbox, regular enemies were hard enough where they could actually beat you. Didn't just get through them by button mashing. You had to know certain patterns to get through them. So normal enemies required a bit of finesse to actually be able to beat them. This game has that. There's non-bosses, maybe mid-bosses, or just regular enemies that if you're not careful, they will take you down. So if you're not used to that, not used to a little bit of elevated difficulty, it could be frustrating. Personally, coming from the NES days where games were just difficult and would punish the hell out of you, I enjoyed this game a lot because of that. Anything that takes you out of the routine of simple button mashing and going through the story is a plus to me. This brings me into the diversity of the boss fights. Like I mentioned, it has a lot of different caves, and every cave has a boss fight. Though it does recycle a few, and some of them it recycles a lot. The sheer diversity of the bosses and the patterns that you have to learn is staggering. And these aren't disguised as just a different looking boss with the same pattern. Just take a look at some of these boss battles. Boss rush mode would bring a lot of replayability to this game. It would be awesome. The character designs on this game are beautiful. This does not look like an open world game. There's a lot of detail to be had in this game, from bosses from your character and the world. And mentioning about the character, you can customize this guy like crazy. Every item that you get, from shoes to helmets, makes your character look unique, look different. And like I mentioned, it's very well designed. So you can go from a heavy armor set to a light armor where you would just move faster, or a mage who doesn't require that much armor because obviously you're fighting off in a distance, and the gameplay goes with whatever set you decide. So yeah, like if you're heavy armored, obviously you want to be inside and taking heavier blows. But if you're a mage and you have light armor, you're gonna want to be further on in the back and try to maintain a distance with bosses or enemies. And I'm just talking about the armors and the armor sets that you can do and make your character look a little bit different. The weapons is definitely where it's at in this game, because it has a ton of different weapons for a ton of different play styles. I imagine just trying to play through with some of these weapons adds replayability to the game, because it is a ton of fun to be able to use these weapons. And some of them, depending on how you choose to level up, you can't use. So you can go a whole game without being able to use a certain weapon, and you're just thinking like, man, I would really like to use that weapon. So replaying it would actually help you, and you would be experiencing a totally different game because you have a totally different set of stats. That is something that they took a lot of time into it, and they did an excellent job in that as well. So is the game worth it at the $70 price tag when it was released? Let's just do the math. I played 188 hours, even if I don't replay it again. Think about it. I mean, that's like 50 cents an hour or something like that. That's crazy. In the current landscape that we're on in video games, where they cram microtransactions down your throat in virtually every game, it's refreshing to see a company not follow suit, not follow the money per se, or not follow the easy money. Because let's be honest, a game that's developed with so much love, the next game is gonna sell without even having to take a look at it. Like, the pre-orders are gonna be massive on this game because you already know what they're gonna be giving you, and what they're giving you is a ton of content that's very well thought out from a company that has a track record that they don't try to screw the gamers. I really gotta say this, From Software, a huge thumbs up to them, a huge thank you from the gamer community, because they're doing something for the gamer that companies nowadays are just moving away from. Another thing that I actually want to mention is the lack of grinding that this game has for being an open world game. I mentioned it again, 188 hours, and there was hardly any grinding on this game. You just level up as you go through different areas, and the stronger the enemies are, the more experience they give you. So there's literally no point in grinding for most of the game. So I figured I'd mention that because, yeah, most RPGs, they take a lot of time to beat, but most of it is grinding, or a lot of it is grinding. This game did not have that, or if it did, it had very little. Another thing is, it had very little backtracking, and if it did so with a little bit more finesse, because there were teleport points. So basically, if you were, say, to the end of the game and you needed to go back to the beginning, you could simply teleport there, and in less than a minute you'd already be where you wanted to be. So the backtracking on it isn't like it was in Resident Evil. Like, oh, I forgot this item, I gotta go back to the saving spot. Backtracking is very well thought out in this game, if there's any in that. And yes, there is, because it's an open world game. There are things that you would forget, or that you couldn't traverse, and you would have to go back. But for the most part, it was very well done. Very little time wasted. Now, one aspect that I have to mention as well, and I mention it on all of my reviews, is the lack of music in this game. Being an open world game, I feel that they missed out on implementing a good soundtrack for the game. Now I hear, well, when I'm playing the game, I'm usually listening to something else. I'm like, no, screw that, man. There's no way I'm gonna be playing Mega Man 2 or Ocarina of Time listening to something else. And let me just be right out blunt with you guys. If you're playing Mega Man 2 or Ocarina of Time and you're listening to something else, you're an asshole. There's no way you should be doing that, because you'd be missing out on a great aspect of the game. So that is my personal opinion, personal preference. I wanted to get a little bit more memorable music from this game. All we have to do is make do with simple ambient sounds, where like a single string violin is like pretty annoying, to be honest. Now, it doesn't mean that there is no good music in it. They opted to actually add decent tracks to the boss battles, which is pretty cool. However, like I mentioned, the boss battles are pretty intense, so you're hyper focused on dodging and attacking, so that you don't pay that much attention to the music. But it does actually have some really good tracks when you're doing boss battles. From Software actually does something that is pretty cool on paper to bring the community together. As a gamer, when you connect online, you could leave little notes behind for other players, so when they go, for example, there's places where this game does it a lot, where you're coming up on a corridor and there's somebody waiting to ambush you from the right or the left. So these little notes they leave behind is like, hey, be careful, there's somebody on the right, or be careful, there's somebody on the left, or things of that nature. However, the community took it upon themselves to be super annoying. I can't tell you how annoyed I was, because I don't know, I probably have OCD, and I just have to read every one of these little things that get left behind, and most of the time it's somebody trying to make fun of butthole. Like, there's a hole right there, it's like butthole, finger, butthole, and I'm telling you, it was so annoying, because throughout the whole game you got some stupid, random stupid guy like just laughing at that and putting that down. Like, dude, come on, man. And like, after 100 times, like, give it up already. Like, this thing is played out already. Stop it. But they just kept going, man. It is one of those things that I wish they would take out. My final thoughts on it is, graphically, for an open world game, this game gets everything right. And again, comparing it to Bethesda open world games, the game is hardly glitchy at all, if any glitches are to be found at all. And gameplay is definitely where this game just shoots to the stratosphere, with so many power-ups, so many weapons. You could choose to play however you want to play and create your own character with play styles that only you would want to play with. I was shocked when I realized how big, how massive this game is. A simple look at the map just completely had me fooled when you start the game, because you don't realize how much content is actually in there. Another aspect that's really cool is the leveling up. It ensures that there's very little grinding to be had in the game. And for people who are used to RPGs, that takes up a lot of time. And the best aspect, in my opinion, is the boss fights. With so many variety of bosses, that alone was a great reason for you to actually start dungeon crawling and just see what the new boss was gonna be, because they were so varied that it was fun actually discovering new bosses. So with so few flaws in the game, it's easy to see why so many people flock to From Software games. When a developer gives you so much for the simple price tag of just $70, they have to be commended. So for all these reasons, this game definitely gets a certified badass for me. And remember, if it's not certified badass, it's just not badass. That's all for today. Thanks for joining me. And if you guys like the content, or you guys have a game that you want me to review or take a look at, just leave it in the comment section below. Thanks for joining me. And as always, stay retro.